All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is our lecture on the Trans-Saharan Trade, and this will actually be the last trade route, I apologize, that we'll be going over. We've already gone over the Silk Road, we've already gone over the Indian Ocean Exchange. Now it's time to look at the western part of Africa and talk about the trading that they are partaking in. Much of this will be a review because we did talk about it in Unit 1, but we will bring up some new topics that you'll need to know, especially about Western Africa. So let's go ahead and move on and look at our essential questions. Once again, our essential questions are: what are the various causes of international trading networks? And then what are the social, technological, cultural, and environmental effects of those large trading networks? So once again, looking at causes of trade, looking at effects of trade. We've already talked about those with the Silk Road and the Indian Ocean Exchange. We'll discuss many of those same themes, but we'll just apply it to the Trans-Saharan trade. Now, what we'll do at the end of our synchronous learning is that I'm going to give you a document. In fact, I'm going to give you a picture, and you're going to have to use that picture in order to create a context and thesis paragraph like we have done in Unit 1, but you'll actually need to go beyond that and create your own paragraph that has a claim and that you support with evidence. And by this time, we've already seen examples of that in our various readings. Like we looked at the Mongol bias packet or the Mongol motivational packet. We saw the different writers and how they formed their claims and evidence. And we even looked at Southernization by Linda Schaefer. And we saw how she created claims and supported them with evidence as well. Now it's your turn. You're going to go ahead and do that as well, because that's the only way for you to develop your historical writing skills. Let's go ahead and jump in. Our partner reading is going to be about Ibn Battuta. We will be going over that during our synchronous session. I'll tell you a couple things you need to know about Ibn Battuta before we get to our synchronous session, so that way you kind of understand what's going on with the reading that we'll do, and then you'll understand this map that I'm about to show as well. So Ibn Battuta was this Muslim traveler from Morocco. So we're talking the northern part of Africa, right up here. I believe he's actually born in Tangier, way up here, just to the south of Spain, in the northern part of Africa. Now, Ibn Battuta himself was a profound traveler, similar to Marco Polo and similar to Zheng He, except that he traveled even further than both of those guys. And the reason that Ibn Battuta's works and his writings about his travels are so important is that it gives us an insight into other cultures, especially other Islamic cultures all throughout the world. Let's go ahead and look at the map here. You can see everywhere he went. He mainly stayed in the Muslim world, going down to the Mali Empire, going over to Baghdad, even coming up here to Isfahan and other places in modern day Iran. But he also entered into the Hindu world in India and then into China as well. So he's an incredibly well traveled individual. All three of these travelers, whether it's Zheng He, Marco Polo, or Ibn Battuta, also, in addition to giving us information, also inspire people to travel and trade more. The people of their home societies are going to read these works and think, oh, this is cool and interesting. There's all these other societies out there. I should travel as well. So their works and their writings are going to kind of spark people's interest in other cultures, and therefore more people are going to travel and trade. And as we have seen in this unit, travel and trade leads to more wealth for all of the societies that partake in trade. We've talked very much about the benefits of engaging in trade. Now, what we're going to focus on today with Ibn Battuta's travels, and we're not going to focus on the rest of the world over here because we've already talked about all of this with the Indian Ocean Exchange and the Silk Road. We're going to focus on his travels to the Mali Empire. Now, when you actually read through Ibn Battuta's works, it's important to keep in mind that everything he points out about the Mali Empire is a difference between the society of the Mali Empire and the society and the culture of his society. He's not going to point out things that are similar. He's not going to say, hey, the Mali Empire does this and it's kind of the same thing that we do. We want to do that because that's not interesting to people. People don't want to read a book about how some far empire that's far away from them does the same exact stuff. They want to read about an empire that does something entirely different than what they're normally accustomed to. And so when he's writing his book, he is writing to the people back in his society. As we'll look at a little bit later in this unit, we're going to see that it's incredibly important to keep in mind who the author is and who the audience is. So we have to keep in mind that Ibn Battuta is a Muslim author from this area of the world, and he's writing about this society in order to inform people of his home society about what this society is like. If we keep that in mind, it will give us a better understanding of why Ibn Battuta is pointing these things out. Ibn Battuta is great and wonderful as he is, and he's remembered pretty well throughout history. He is a bit of a kind of a snob. Is kind of the best way to put it. He thinks very highly of himself and his own society, and he thinks very lowly of every other society. So when he actually travels across the Saharan Desert to the Mali Empire, he looks down upon their culture. What he sees is that instead of using gold or silver for trade, the people of the Mali Empire use salt. He thinks that's absolutely ridiculous. In the reading, he will talk about how one of the travelers will go around and hunt for snakes, and he'll put his hand into a hole in the ground and try to grab a snake. And Ibn Battuta thinks he's an absolute idiot for doing so. So Ibn Battuta does very much look down upon other societies, but what he points out about the Mali Empire, which is important for our study, is the Mali Empire's treatment of women. Ibn Battuta himself was a very strict, very devout Muslim individual. And we've already seen that in the world of Islam, especially in what was formerly the Abbasid Caliphate right up here, that men and women almost lived in separate societies. Went with men and kind of did their own thing and could have multiple wives and could really do whatever they want. Women went with other women. They were to veil themselves and they were to be inferior to their husbands, or they were to serve their husbands. And we've seen that when we talked about Islam, and we've talked about that already. But when Ibn Battuta goes to Mali, he sees something entirely different. In Mali, he sees that women have more rights. They have almost a better sense of equality. You might ask, well, why is that? We know that Mali is converted to Islam. We know that Sundiata converted to Islam. We know that Mansa Musa, famous for going all the way to Mecca, obviously he's a Muslim as well. But we have to remember that in our study of Africa, especially inland Africa, I apologize for that, um, we saw that in these small kin-based societies, there were very matrilineal organizations and a very matrilineal culture in which the mother was the one in charge of the family, and females had more equality to males. Well, people like Mansa Musa and other leaders of the Mali Empire have to keep that in mind. They can't just completely replace this matrilineal society with a patriarchal society of Islam. And so they take the ideas of Islam in order to trade with the Islamic world and combine them with some of the traditional African cultures that were already there. And so you get an entirely different way of practicing Islam, one that makes Ibn Battuta very upset because what he sees is that the women walking around the places like Timbuktu are not wearing veils, which goes against his idea of what a good Muslim woman is supposed to be like. He also sees that Muslim women are going to interact with men who aren't their husband. They are going to have friends who are males, and some of the males have friends who are females who are not any of their wives. And so this is appalling to Ibn Battuta, and he very much looks down upon them. And so what we really need to keep in mind is that there were different ways of practicing Islam, and this once again is an example of syncretism. Let's go ahead and let's move on to some of our study about the Trans-Saharan trade. But I do want you to know that most of our information that we're going to be looking at today does come from Ibn Battuta. Let's go ahead and get started here. So this is a pretty good map of the Trans-Saharan trade. Remember, people of the Middle East, people in like Baghdad or so, are coming across the Saharan desert and they're trading with West Africa, whether that is the Mali Empire or whether that is the Songhai Empire that we'll talk about in just a little bit. Now, you might look at this and you say, Mr. Cernak, I'm good at geography. I know what's going on here. This is a huge desert right here. So Sahara Desert, biggest desert in the world. How are people getting across? How are people going all the way from the Middle East across this desert and getting all the way down here? Well, there's new technology that allows them to do that. The first one is camel saddles, and we've already talked about camel saddles when we talked about the Silk Road, and so those camel saddles will once again be used with the Trans-Saharan trade. And the second one is caravans. It's a pretty simple idea. Travel in numbers. That's what a caravan is. Don't travel by yourself. If you travel by yourself, you only carry so much. If you start to feel sick because of the heat, well, no one's going to be there to help you out. So, but if you travel in numbers, you can protect yourself. Now, why would people still make this dangerous trip? I mean, when we look at Ibn Battuta's reading during our synchronous learning, we'll see that people die along the way. I mean, why would people undertake this very dangerous journey? Well, there's a demand for goods, as we saw in the Silk Road and we saw in the Indian Ocean Exchange. Those goods that are demanded aren't silk and porcelain like they were in China, but ivory, gold, and slaves. As we've already talked about several times, going all the way back to Unit 1, Islam is going to have a large influence in North and West Africa right there. We've already talked about Ghana a little bit, and they are outside of our time frame, so we're not going to talk about them too much. I just want you to be aware that this particular area has been trading ivory, gold, and slaves for an incredibly long time. So that very much is a continuity that you can use on your AP exam. We've already talked about the Mali Empire and Mansa Musa as well. He converted to Islam. He made his famous pilgrimage to Mecca. He's selling gold, ivory, and slaves. And while Europe is going through the dark ages and floundering around with no knowledge or technology or anything like that, he has made the Mali Empire a center of learning, specifically in the capital city of Timbuktu with the Muslim University of Timbuktu. But we're going to see that starts to change a little bit. We're going to see some continuities and some change. The main continuity is that this particular area is still going to be incredibly wealthy. It's still going to be Islamic, and it's still going to be a center of learning. But our big change is that this empire is going to start to step up. Now, the Mali Empire is still going to be around for a while, but it's going to be in a very weak state. It's not going to be at its height like it was under Mansa Musa. So around the early 1400s, I apologize, let's just say 1464, not 1474. I will make sure to change that as soon as I'm done recording this lecture. Around the mid 1400s, the Mali Empire starts to weaken. There's a lot of infighting. If you'll remember our study of the Mongol Empire, we said the Mongol Empire became expansive, and then there were many sons who all had claims to the throne. And so the empire started to break up. And we talked about the Ilkhanate and the Golden Horde and the Yuan dynasty. Well, something similar is happening in Mali, where you have many different sons and grandsons and cousins and whatnot all have a legitimate claim to the throne, and there's a lot of infighting. Well, whenever there's a lot of infighting, no one is taking power, and it makes it very easy for someone else or someone new, someone different to take power and take control. The specific person who took power and control during all of this infighting was a person outside of Mali society and a person of the Songhai culture, specifically Sunni Ali or Sunni Ali. It can be spelled with an SU or an SO. Now he's going to take Mali land and he is going to create the capital city of Gao. As we see here, this is the Songhai Empire, and these are their three major cities right here. Now, Sunni Ali himself is a very controversial individual, especially in Songhai history. First off, he created a lot of wealth. I mean, he used the gold fields, he had the ivory, he had the slaves as well, and he sells those. And he continues trading with all of these Islamic traders who are coming to this part of the world, coming to West Africa, and he makes people very, very rich. He also gives the people some sort of sense of control and sense of well-being. After all, there was a lot of chaos in the Mali Empire, and this Sonny Ali guy is making everyone stop fighting. He's the one who's in charge. He's the one who's in control, and people like having that little bit of security there. However, Sonny Ali did some things that people see as very negative. First off, he uses violence in order to get his way. So, you can't sit down and talk to Sonny Ali and say, you know what, let's come to a compromise. It's either you're on his side or he's going to kill you, one of the two. So, yes, that would obviously make him a very controversial character. But he also was not a devout Muslim. He very much combined the ideas of Islam with the ideas of traditional African religions. And the reason he did that is because there was much benefit from being labeled as a Muslim. Even if you didn't fully believe in the Islamic faith, being a Muslim gave you a bunch of benefits. You could trade with other Muslims. But he didn't really. Sonny Ali did not want to give up some of the traditional African culture and traditional African religions that he had grown up with. So this leads to many intellectuals in Timbuktu and Gao, these Islamic Muslim intellectuals who start to challenge him a bit. Now, Sonny Ali could maybe work with those intellectuals and maybe change his ways, or he could throw those intellectuals in jail and then kill them. He's going to choose to do the second one. He's very much anti intellectual because it's going to challenge his power structure. That leads to Askia Mohammed, who is going to be another ruler of the Songhai Empire, to step up and challenge the rule of Sonny Ali. Now, Sonny Ali dies, and he passes rule onto his son. Askia Mohammed sees this as an opportunity to step in and start taking control. He says, well, look, Sonny Ali wasn't a good person. He wasn't a good leader. He committed all these horrible acts of violence, and he's not even a real Muslim. You should get me and let me be the emperor because I am a real Muslim. I am full for Islam, not for combining Islam with all these traditional African religions and whatnot. So he very much uses religion to centralize his rule and bring in more education and knowledge and alliances to the Songhai. He is making the people of the Songhai Empire identify with the government, which is a part of the Conrad de Mars model, as we talked about time and time again in Unit 1. So this part of Africa starts to become much more centralized. Remember, when we talked about Africa in Unit 1, we said there were many kin-based, very small, very decentralized organizations. That is really starting to go out the window, and now you have much larger empires, ones that have expansive bureaucracy, ones that have a tax system, like we've talked about in all of the other empires that we've looked at during Units 1 and 2, but also an empire that is not anti-intellectual, is actually pro-intellectual. It is using those Islamic scholars in Timbuktu and Gao in order to promote education, bring more knowledge, bring more trade alliances, because people are much more willing to trade with someone who's peaceful as opposed to someone who's violent. And so Askia Mohammed uses all of that to create this large, powerful Islamic empire in Western Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to be the end of our lecture because our next slide is our projector quiz, and we'll talk about that more in our synchronous learning. As I said at the beginning, that is the end of I'm sorry, I said at the beginning that this was our last trade route there we are going to go over. What we're going to go over for the remainder of the lectures is I've talked about how Europe is going to greatly benefit from all of this trade, and how that's going to lead them to become much more centralized, to challenge some of those structural powers, and then eventually have Columbus set sail and quote unquote discover the new world. We're going to be looking at Europe much more specifically with both the Renaissance and the bubonic plague.